nation where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.
And if you've ever tried doing anything in life, child rearing, your own job, passing a driving test, how many things go in a straight line? Answer: zero. Absolutely zero. We need the jaggedness of human beings. What we don't want to do is sanitize them so they all become unikit, and we become a monoculture, which is what's happened and is happening. And no one likes it. So why do straight lines haunt the economy, haunt economic theory and the economy? People believe, the neoliberals believe, that society is no more than the sum of its parts. That to understand the whole, all you have to do is connect the dots, and that the interactions between human beings are either zero or negligible. The interactions between human beings are the things that make us human. That's why loneliness is why we have such an epidemic of loneliness now, especially in the West. And they believe this stuff, and they want you to believe it too. My suggestion is don't. So the recurring nightmare of the straight line is that the next generation of economists will have to wake up and move on. So the last bit of neoliberal ideology is that we form a simplistic ideology that expects the worst of human beings and validates value extraction. By using selective economic modelling and clear social prejudice, it deregulates and disenfranchises citizens. Should be all citizens. By labelling the state inefficient and fetishising the so-called free market, neoliberalism encourages politicians to use legislation that puts public property in private hands. It runs on crony capitalism, encouraging, without limit, the rentier economy. And this means that under the banner of efficiency, community-created value, the stuff that you all create when you go about your lives, unearned income and economic rent can be legally funneled into private bank accounts, often held offshore. John Kay, the economist, 2009, slipped up and said it. You can become wealthy by creating wealth, or by appropriating the wealth created by other people. That is their game. That is the austerity game. It's the last-ditch effort to push this neoliberal agenda. When the appropriation of wealth is illegal, it's called theft. When it's legal, and it is legal, Goldman Sachs legally go about their business. Economists call it rent seeking. Rent seeking is about skimming off the share of wealth created by others. So when you feel that total injustice and you don't really know, because of the formlessness of this ideology, when you feel that total injustice, this is the process, this is the underlying process that's going on. There's rent seeking, it's apportioning the wealth, often created by you, and paying CEOs astronomical. Mike Ashcroft at Sports Direct, the way he runs that business, and in comparison to his pay packet. And if you want me to give you a diametrically opposed business, Patagonia, still make good money, excellent trust in that business, very ethical, and they go out on Black Friday and they say, please don't buy our stuff. Only buy it if you need it. You wouldn't see him say that. I mean, look at the state of Newcastle Football Club. These people will go down in history as worse than the Victorian workhouse type because we've moved on. We didn't really have the knowledge back then. We have the knowledge now. It's important that we talk about it. And just so I'm not some conspiracy loony, because they do tell you that's how people marginalise you, I tweeted Jeffrey Sachs, the guy who Bono wrote the foreword to his book for. No one's perfect. And I said to him, Prof. Sachs, what's your view on rent seeking? Looking forward to hearing it. And he says about and this is an eminent man, right? He's been in government, he's respected, and he says the US political economy is now built on rent seeking, finance, military, industrial complex, healthcare, and fossil fuels. If you want an absolute coup, these neoliberals have done an awesome, awesome job. That Mont Pelerin society back 45 years ago when they said we've got to get this right and use Frederick Hayek and we've got to get funded and we've got to fund all the think tanks, we've got to fund the universities, we've got to fund Chicago. We sent the Chicago boys to Chile, Mount Milton Friedman, and look what happened there. And it's still alive and kicking, thankfully. We're onto it. And then I said, well, it's really edifying to hear such honesty about rent seeking in the US from Jeff Sachs. This is where we focus our attention, I'm sure you agree. And he says, yeah, our political system has become utterly corrupted, both parties. It's a disgrace and a huge cost to the American people. And he, by the way, is now on the team for Bernie Sanders, along with Stephanie Kelton, and that lot. And the reason why you're seeing a rise in people like Sanders, who I think is an absolutely fine individual, never wants to compromise his morals and where he stands. And that little bird moment, if you saw it, only making that speech is really special. Probably the best thing that's happened in American politics in the last 50 years. The rise of these people is because man on the street, the people who've been victim of rent seeking, have had enough. And this is really the mechanism, this is how it works. So you go about your lives, social enterprise and work, which means that services get better, infrastructure gets improved, new technologies, etc. This increases the quality of life, and everyone will see this. And then communities become more desirable to live in, obviously. If you think about what's happened in Peckham and what's happening in Peckham, all the hipsters move in, all the creative moves in, then the rents start to go up. Why? Because community value starts to go up, or economic rent starts to go up. Then that gets privatised. You then start to see wealth inequality, poverty, taxation, fines, and social unrest. Once the gentrifiers have moved on, the property developers have moved on, and then you have the social and economic issues, not least inequality. And that's really gentrification. Why? Because no freeholder obligation. Freeholders don't have an obligation. Why? Because the whole economy works in equilibrium. So if you don't have if you watch that Kirsty Allsopp and all those people who are just flipping houses all the time and driving the houses prices up and up and up, and then what is a logical progression of that? Gated communities. You have economic apartheid. Why? Because it becomes a pay-to-play economy. So you need, in every mature democracy, some kind of freeholder obligation, which would mean that community-created value isn't privatised into property values and then extracted, often into places like Panama or the British Virgin Islands. Now, everyone has to put their hand in their pocket and say, I want to live in that kind of society, not the one where, Kirsty Allsopp is hero worship. Or sitting at dinner parties saying, my house has gone up 26% in the last four years. And taking credit for it. What, because you painted the walls magnolia and put a wood floor in it? Like, you didn't do that. But this hyper-individualism, they go, yeah, I did it. No, it's the schools, it's the infrastructure, it's the National Health Service, it's access to decent water, it's living in a society. Here's a key point. We don't live, ladies and gentlemen, in an economy. Politicians will tell you we live in an economy. No, we live in a society. We should live in a society, and the economy should serve that society. What's happened is it's capsized, and apparently we live in an economy. This is a massive mistake. This is a real mechanism of our ills. And what is it? Well, it's a free lunch. So the economic rent, or the economic surplus, today is being drained by landlords, bankers, and bondholders. So when countries go bust, and at the moment, how long have you got? Greece. The reason the Germans are into Greece is because the Greek taxpayers, the German government want the Greek taxpayers on the hook, and that's the bondholder at the bottom here. I'll tell you a story at the end about Yanis. I was with Yanis Varoufakis recently, and he's such a good guy, by the way. What you see is what you get, and he told me a very interesting about Larry Summers and things. And here is Larry Summers. That's him there on the right. This is Rob Rubin. Both of them got rid of Glass-Steagall in the US. And Alan Greenspan was so badly influenced by Ayn Rand, who was diametrically opposed to what Adam Smith came up with in The Economist. And he said, Larry Summers has said, and it's a massive admission from him, the United States now is well on the way to becoming a Downton Abbey economy. And I'm not up for living all those stairs, if you haven't noticed. So Adam Smith long ago remarked that profits often the highest in nations fastest going to ruin. There are many ways to create economic suicide on a national level. The major way throughout history has been to indebt the economy. Debt always expands to reach the point where it can't be paid by large swathes of the economy. That is the point where austerity is imposted and ownership of wealth polarises between the 1% and the 99%. This is from Professor Michael Hudson, I really recommend. He's written a book called Killing the Host, which is fantastic. So what we've got to do is make this distinction, remake this distinction between earned wealth and unearned wealth, because that is the crux of the problem. If your house price has gone up by 25%, 80%, 200%, whatever it is, there'll be a lot of that money which is unearned. Naturally. If a CEO is getting paid 2,000 times what the average worker is being paid, all of that is economic rent. That is unearned wealth. You're not telling me that CEO does a shift which is 2,500 times more potent than the bloke on the factory floor. How can he? She. And this is the big issue. So the classical economists basically made the distinction between earned and unearned income. And earned income or income derived that was earned, they talked about. Income that was derived that was unearned, they talked about. And they made that distinction because that was the way to to have a progressive society. And morally it was wrong. I mean, Adam Smith, he was a moral philosopher. He didn't think of himself as an economist. And what happened was this guy came along, John Bates Clark. And before he tipped up with his bloody book, the commonality between all classical economists, not neoclassical, classical, was a distinction between earned income and unearned income, right? He comes along and says there's no distinction between earned income and unearned income, it's all the same. Well, you can imagine what happened when he said that. All the landlords, all the bankers, all the rent seekers, all the people who sat idly on their behind and didn't do an honest shift said fund him. And it also happened with Herbert Spencer. In Social Statics, his book, his famous book, in the first edition he said land was a unique factor of production. Not just a factor of production, a unique factor of production. In the second book, after he'd been wined and dined by the aristocracy, no mention of land. Go to any economics textbook now in any Ivy League university. Any. And go to the back. See how many entries there are for labour, see how many entries there are for capital, and see how many entries there are for land. 3 factors of production, land, labour, capital. Somehow neoclassical economists have totally written land out of the equation. So how on earth are you going to iron out housing booms and busts if you're not looking at the key factor of production? You're not. And some of that blame, a lot of that blame goes down to this guy. And as soon as the landlords saw it, as soon as the aristocracy saw it, they said, fund this. So today, if we're going to retrieve our economies and ultimately our democracy, because democracy is really a threat, what we have to do, once again, is to recognise the difference between earned and unearned increment, income, or rent. We may realise that inflating prices of things that currently exist is really, really unproductive. You see that, sorry. So if we're constantly inflating or reflating the housing market, we realise that that is a total and utter waste of productive capital. That capital could be pushed into biotech research. It could go into creating enterprise parks where entrepreneurs don't pay rent until they start making some money, and then they put a portion of their income or all their profits towards the landlord. It could go to anything. It could go to the NHS. Can you imagine that? And this is in March 2015, and it's so innocuous. People don't think that there's interrelationship here. On one side, you've got this reflation of the housing market, which is this help to buy disaster, a total and utter social disaster. This is selling Britain now, and you've seen now in London what's happened. Every dodgy regime globally has bought a flat there. They don't need help to buy, but the people at the bottom do, insofar as they get them in debt and get them paying rent to the banks. And on the same page of this section of the Times in 2015 March, poorest can't eat, food minister admits. These two things are linked. And if we if we go back to the neoliberal idea, they're not. Of course they are. So we've got to get rid of it. This neoliberal or neoclassical economics. And it's going to be harder than a few presentations and a few films and all the rest of it. But there are a growing number of people, and thankfully students, who've had enough. There are also some brilliant professors out there, Herman Daly, Professor Steve King, Professor Michael Hudson. Lots and lots of guys who are leading the charge, heterodox economists, who've really said enough's enough. I'm not coming here just to beat it all up, we need a good kicking, but what I'm coming here is to say that we can replace it with something which is far more wholesome. And there is light at the end of the tunnel, because it really is on its last legs, just we need to kick it over. So the manifesto of Renegade Inc., which is the successor brand to Four Horsemen, if you like, and what we just crowdfunded recently. We see a huge amount of demand in the market for us to create an organisation that talks like this, and also creates businesses that actually add value. So what we want I think it's an 8-point plan, is clear language. Oh, by the way, whilst there's value for some people, the practices on the right, that's the 1%, we feel that the principles on the left are more valuable to everybody, society. So the first would be clear language over confusing words and concepts. Back in the day, the guilds used Latin, the lawyers and the doctors, because they needed to protect their IP. And that's what's happening with the bankers today. They use collateralised debt obligation. They can't explain it. COCOs. Does anyone know what COCO is? NERP, ZIRP, ZERP, TARP. All these acronyms are total bullshit. You might as well say about all of them, taking taxpayers' money to prop up a defunct system which doesn't deliver value anymore because it becomes so extractive. So what I want is, or what we want collectively, is clear language over confusing words and concepts. The real economy over the rent-seeking economy. Now, the rent-seeking economy does serve 1%, but the real economy serves everybody. And there's way that, and it's a design job, it's an engineering job, that you can actually design the economy that you want, and then you go and get the economists to say to them, deliver that. Not the economists do what you want. Whose payroll are you on? You watch Inside Job, that guy who wrote Destability in Iceland. And then afterwards he changed his thesis. He was getting paid 75 grand. Are you for real? So the real economy over the rent-seeking economy, I'm not a big fan of the rentiers. Distribution of opportunity over monopoly. Very few people know that monopoly, the game, was actually invented by a Quaker woman to show what happens when you start privatising land rent. Now, I don't know how many of you played Monopoly, but it doesn't end well. Ever. And introduce a bottle of Malbec and a few gin and tonics to it, and you will find that next morning people aren't talking to each other. What happened? The Parker brothers came along, they saw Monopoly, they thought, bloody hell, we'll appeal to people's self-interest here. There's a game in this. So what should have been used to teach people about the pernicious nature of rent-seeking actually was converted and sold to people's naked self-interest and ambition. The irony is fantastic, right? So what I want is distribution of opportunity over monopoly. And it's not, by the way, redistribution of wealth. And let me explain that. If you put the rentier class in charge of something, they don't last very long because they're crap at it. They're not very good at people skills, they're not very good at innovation. They haven't used those skills. They haven't needed to. They're shooting pheasants and collecting rent. That's what they're doing, broadly. So when you start putting people, and the people's Eton School, right? They came up with, they've got an academy which is Eton. They came from an exam point of view. They've absolutely beaten the other guys, or certainly on par with them in the median. So I want distribution of opportunity and set the economy free and get us moving again. Key point, access to education over a commoditised education market. This legislation that's going through the finance bill at the moment is basically putting academies across the UK. That is a disaster. Yes. It's a total and utter disaster, and it's so neoliberal. I tell you now, if you've got kids, they're being privatised. Because those kids going through those systems, when you own the means of production, and you own the outcomes, and you own the national curriculum, you can say what you want. And you'll bend little minds into what older people or people who need to defend this system need them to think. Now, economics in university has been economic history's gone. No one knows that in 1907 Cambridge University divorced the moral sciences from teaching in economics. No one knows that. Well, you don't think they're interlinked? When Adam Smith was a moral philosopher, the godfather, when he writes a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, of course they're intertwined. So what do? You get it in the kids early, and you say, this is the market, it works in equilibrium, you get on with it, and don't question anything. And that's not happening. Henry VIII was the famous crony capitalist. He did exactly the same things to the monasteries. And if you really want to take up a battle, you really want to get traction, talk to people about their kids being privatised. And from a human right point of view, a commoditised education market is lunatic. It's lunacy. Access to education and self-paced learning, because people get to learning at their own speeds. Not this curriculum stuff where you're burning kids out. There's bloody suicide everywhere. Absolutely wrong. Key point. Real wealth and value creation over the creation of money and debt. People now increasingly know that banks create money out of thin air and with interest. That's a good thing. Profit is a byproduct of good business, as opposed to profit as a motive, because we've seen the problem. It's all self-explanatory. Key point here, collaboration and collectivism over egotistical self-interest and individualism. You know, and again, this comes back to Adam Smith versus Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand was a nut job. She really was, and sadly, Greenspan listened to her for 25 years. And then lastly, I'm just conscious of the time, and because I want to get to questions, timeless universal principles over ad hoc man-made protocol and laws. We have got to realise that that natural law, whether you like it or not, whether there's lobbying or not, natural law, the environment, exists. And if you start breaking those natural laws, all sorts of bad things happen and will continue to happen. Our audience are a mindset. It's not about when they were born, it's not about their socio-economic environment, it's not about any of that. They want collaboration, they want community created value, and they're everywhere. Every time we took the film out, I dare say, and we called them Cohort C, and that C is, I think, a new force in citizenship, or you can have it as collaboration. But this cohort want causes, and they want the kind of unity that society doesn't have at the moment because of the unfettered self-interest that we've had to endure. So Cohort C, our view, an attitude, a state of mind, and it will be, and is, a powerful new force in citizenship. I dare say you're part of that cohort, and what we need to do is talk increasingly. It's fine social media, it's fine filling your news feeds with anti-Tory propaganda, but the most important job, which Sam has done today, is get people in a room and to talk to one another, swap ideas, and have that kind of exchange. So it's not all bad, but it is on a knife edge. You've got to kick over the neoliberal ideology. The academisation of schools should be really top of the list, yes, because people who can't yet defend themselves, you have to defend. Moral obligation. And we'll win. But it'll be a fight. But it'll be good fun, I think. Because when you've got the truth, or when you have authenticity, you're in a much stronger position. Jumping on the poor to get the poor and the middle class to infight, and the immigrants, is not a viable strategy to prolong an economic system. I can tell you that. So watch the film, watch Four Horsemen, make that distinction between unearned and earned increment, rent, or income, and let's fight on. We are at Renegade Inc. Please follow us. Also, my Twitter handle here. And Four Horsemen, as I said, is available on YouTube for free. And that's it. Thank you very much. Until we start using this terminology, until we start bringing it back in, the language back into play, and we're not, by the way, ashamed to ask the questions, because when you're disenfranchised and poor, doffing cap and saying we don't, I shouldn't have ideas above my station. Absolutely wrong. Have as many ideas. There's nothing above your station. Say it, ask it, naive question, the bullshit question, say it, keep saying it, keep saying it. And as soon as they start saying you're a conspiracy theorist, you know you win.
The information where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.